Don't worry, I'll have the internet doesn't show up for your first meeting.
I know. What kind of support is that? Yeah. Okay, I think we're ready to start.
You're in charge.
Okay.
Gavel us in.
I'm going to call to order Design Review Board meeting for Wednesday, January 22nd. Do we have any staff comments?
Yes, we do have a few things to communicate, staff, to the board. Really, since it's so early in the new year, new season, there isn't a whole lot of updates on projects, but I wanted to give you a snapshot of what's ahead of you, at least at this month. So in our next meeting, which is in 2 weeks, we've got 3 items. So Board Member Paul will be excited to know we have a full agenda. I want to give you a quick glimpse. We've got a vacant lot on Windward Lane. Actually, it's 3 vacant lots on Windward Way, which is over there east of the canal. Conceptual design review of 2 new light industrial office buildings, and these are over vacant lots. 38 Upper Fremont, which is also a design review for a new single-family residence on a vacant hillside parcel, very much like this, and also including a lot line adjustment, which is what this project is also providing. And then it's 575 and 595 Francisco Boulevard each, which is the Subaru dealership. They are finally coming in for a sign program. They're pretty common with dealerships, auto dealerships, to have a sign program. They have unique sign needs. And Subaru has been able to survive without a sign program, and now they finally decided that they want to have a sign program and more signs. So that will be coming to you on the first meeting in February. The second meeting, we have a 1-item agenda, and that's the return of 104 Shaver Street. You'll remember that is a six-unit apartment building out there in the corner of Shaver and 3rd Street. 3rd Street, I think it is. Yes, that's where it is. And that's another Wednesday. I want to make sure the board was remembering that we have 4 special Wednesday meetings. And the reason why that happens is because on holiday weeks, especially when the holiday falls on a Monday, the city council takes our Tuesday night meetings and we get pushed over to Wednesdays. So tonight is one of those meetings. On the second meeting in February, we'll have another one, and then we have 2 more toward the end of the year, one in September and one in October. So we have 4 this year. So I just want to let you know that not the next meeting, but the following meeting is another Wednesday meeting.
Do we have a calendar for this year, or were we sent that?
Yeah, I do have one. I will
And
email
did you
it
get
to all the board members tomorrow morning.
Great.
And that concludes staff's brief communications.
Is that Shaver project the thing we saw before?
It is. It's a returning item. You've looked at it. You provided comments regarding parking, the staircase, the
It's
the
just
negative space in the back, stuff like that. So they'll
the
be
reason I'm
returned.
asking is why don't we just put it on the other agenda and have 4 items, because that should be a fairly quick one, right?
They're just, it is actually too late to notice it. Notice has already been sent out. They weren't ready.
Were they able to resolve the parking on that?
They've made modifications. I think it best to wait and then let staff evaluate it, and then the board can also evaluate it then.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Do we have any board communications? I had one question. Last meeting, we had talked about doing a refresher on the rules of order, and it's something you thought you could organize, and I was wondering if we could try to get that in February or March.
I will take care of that.
Great. Okay, next item is the approval of the minutes from Tuesday, January 7th. Any comments on the minutes that we have in front of us?
Move to approve as submitted.
Great. Okay, awesome. All those in favor?
Aye.
Abstain.
Great. Okay, new business. Today, we're looking at 7 Bellevue Avenue, a request for environmental and design review permit to allow construction of a new 4,478 square foot single-family residence and associated site. Can we get the staff report?
Yes. Before we begin, I have a couple of things to pass around. One is the material and color board, current material and color board. A couple of items that were handed to me. These happen to be graphic representations of what the building will look like, the new single-family residence, as well as some photos of the site. and the trees. And lastly, the applicant has revised their proposed landscape plan. So I wanted to pass those around to you. There's actually there are there are only 4 copies of this, so I apologize, but this is for the board as well. So I'd like to pass this around. Thank you, Mark. So tonight, this is 7 Bellevue Avenue. This is it may or may not be the address if it's ever approved. This is a temporary address that's assigned to a vacant lot. It's actually 2 vacant lots under common ownership. 7 Bellevue is the first of the 2 to be proposed for development of a new single-family resident on this vacant hillside parcel. Proposes to construct a new 4,478 square foot single-family residence on the vacant hillside. It also includes a lot line adjustment of approximately a little under 2,000 square feet from the subject site that we'll be reviewing tonight to the adjacent site. Once again, that's under the same common ownership. There is a shared driveway that will link not only this site, but also the adjacent site next to it as well, and also to Bellevue Avenue. Proposal would remove 10 existing trees, predominantly significant coast live oaks. Significant is a definition in the San Rafael residential design guidelines that identify any tree, particularly any oak that's greater than 6 inches in diameter, as measured 4.5 feet from the root crown. So about breast height, 6 inches in diameter is considered a significant oak. So the proposal is to remove 10 existing trees. Most are going to be removed be based on the driveway design. The design guidelines require a 3-to-1 replacement ratio, which would require a total of 30 replacement oak trees. The applicant has submitted both a landscape plan and also an arborist report that identifies that the site will not accept 30 additional in-kind oak trees. And it also goes further to state that the existing landscape plan proposed is sufficient and proper for the site. Right now, currently, it asks for 5 replacement trees. I believe it's been revised upward, so it might have 6 or 7 by now, maybe even 8. But there'll be replacement trees, but far less than the 30 that's required underneath the hillside design guidelines. Design seems to meet all the applicable R20 zoning and hillside standards, with the exception of the natural state. There's a deficiency of 46 square feet that is an anomaly that will need to be remedied prior to approval. And then also the tree replacement is not compliant. And then and beyond that, it would be compliant with all other development standards. Comments received. Staff received comments from the adjacent property owner immediately to the south, which is 23 Bellevue Avenue. Those comments were basically wanting some additional landscape screening between the structure, the new single-family residence proposed on the site, and their property at 23 Bellevue Avenue. In addition, they also asked that some of the mature oak trees that are proposed for removal to be preserved. Staff supports the limited additional landscape screening between the site and 23 Bellevue. Once again, I believe the revised landscape plan that was passed out at the beginning of this introduction to the board clearly shows additional landscape screening. Also, staff supports a proposal. Staff supports it. There was something that staff brought up that I wanted to basically elaborate on. Development on a hillside is basically a very fluid type of development. The board has the ability to waive the uncovered parking spaces. You're always having to provide the covered parking spaces, but there is also a provision that in hillsides, when there is a road that's shorter than 26 feet in width, you're supposed to provide 2 additional either uncovered or covered parking spaces. This project is proposing to put the 2 covered as well as 4 uncovered parking spaces on the site. The hillside design guidelines have a provision that allows for the board to waive the uncovered parking spaces, that additional parking spaces beyond the garage parking spaces, if it's a balancing act between site grading, preservation of trees, things of that sort. So it's something that the board has within their realm. It does meet the development standards as far as the parking requirement. However, if it's coming at the expense of unnecessary grading or unnecessary tree removal, it's within the board's purview to make waiver of those parking spaces. So staff went forward and said that they wanted the board to weigh in on that waiver, and that's something to your disposal if you're interested. That would essentially, as it's covered in staff's report, it would preserve 3 significant oak trees if you remove the covered spaces. In addition to the uncovered spaces, in addition to, it would reduce overall site grading and also retaining wall heights along the driveway. Staff requests the board's recommendations to the zoning administrator on whether the project adequately complies with the design-related general plan and zoning ordinance regulations and standards, including the zoning and hillside development guidelines as identified in staff's report. Staff finds that the project complies with most of the applicable design guidelines, and revision of the landscape plan is appropriate to provide additional tree plantings for screening and to fully mitigate the proposed tree removal. Staff had identified in our report that we thought, since this is in common ownership with the adjacent parcel, which is also vacant, that perhaps the deficiency in the replacement of trees could be planted on the adjacent property. So it's deficient by 20 replacement oak trees, and perhaps an appropriate place to put those would be on the adjacent site. Since this is not considered off-site mitigation, instead it would be considered under common ownership. So you could essentially require the landscape, the replacement trees to be put on the adjacent lot to the north. Staff further finds that the waiver of the proportion of the uncovered parking spaces may be in order to reduce tree removal and limit driveway retaining wall heights and site grading. However, this is to the board, up to the board, and I'm hoping that the board will weigh in on that. In addition, staff welcomes the board's guidance on any of the site and building design details that would further improve this project. As staff has identified in our staff report, there are a number of areas that we hope that the board will weigh in on specific. They include parking, the architectural design, retaining walls, landscaping, and that essentially concludes staff's introduction of the project.
Can you review the site plan that was just sent over to us, or just provided to us, and just show where those 3 trees are located that are now preserved?
Oh, that was my misunderstanding. I didn't mean to tell you that they've been
Okay.
preserved. Instead, that is something that's within the power of the board to make a waiver of the additional uncovered parking spaces if you find, as I've said, that the development on hillsides is really a balancing act between grading, tree removal, and the need to have off-site parking. So if you find that the cost of having uncovered parking, the additional uncovered parking, is the removal of heritage trees, too many heritage trees, and unnecessary grading, it's within the purview of the board to waive that additional uncovered parking if you are preserving and reducing grading.
I'm a little confused though.
Please.
There's 10 trees that are initially heritage trees that are initially proposed to be removed.
Correct.
And that would require the addition of 30 trees,
Correct.
but they're only providing an additional 5 trees.
I believe the revised landscape plan now bumped it up to 8 or 9 or something. I'm not sure exactly what it is.
Okay. Now,
But there's a missing delta of about 20
Yeah.
trees that are.
And if we waive the uncovered parking, that would save some trees or not?
It would save up to three.
So instead
mature
of
trees.
10 trees,
It'd be down to
it'd be
7.
7.
Correct.
So then they would be required to have 21 replacement trees,
Correct.
of which they're proposing now 8.
Something about, yeah,
So they're still deficient,
yes.
but not quite as much as before.
And that's where staff's comments came in regarding maybe putting the replacement trees on the adjacent parcel.
Okay, thanks.
Where are those 3 trees?
They would be where the parking space, the 2 uncovered parking spaces that are closest to Bellevue Avenue.
two uncovered on the west side of the driveway?
No, they would be directly where the parking spaces, the two uncovered parking spaces along the, correct, on the west side. They'll need to be removed for those parking spaces. So the idea of removal possibly might save them. I'm sure those would need to be evaluated by an arborist again, maybe before we make that decision. But nonetheless, I just wanted to make sure the board was aware that that is something that they have in their pocket. It's a tool that they can use if they believe that there's just far too many heritage trees to be removed, or it's too much grading, or even if the retaining walls are too high, that there's an ability to waive the requirement of those two additional parking spaces.
So I have one other quick question. As a result of the lot line adjustment, the lower lot, is it still conforming for a building site at a later time?
They both will. Yeah, right now, the one that's north of it, the one that is not in front of you, the one that's going to be directly to the north, is deficient. But now with the lot line adjustment of approximately 2,000 square feet, it will be meeting minimum lot size.
I have a question about staff's recommendation on locating the replacement trees on the adjacent
Yes.
lot. Are we just kicking the can? I mean, have you gone through and put like footprints and talked with the applicant about where those trees might go? Because I have a feeling if we're just gonna see that site developed and then have another issue with the trees.
Yeah, no, this would be more of a condition for when that comes forward, that it has to include or show where those additional delta trees are, those replacement trees are. I wasn't really expecting that they would be planted now because there's just no infrastructure, there's no watering up there, so it would
Yeah.
be. I leave it up to a landscape architect. It's not for me to say. It's just an idea that it's one of those opportunities where we have two lots under common ownership. One can't provide any more replacement tree, there's no room. However, there's a one next door that may. And you're right, an arborist has not evaluated that one to see if they can accept the additional replacement tree. It was something that staff thought this is an opportunity that maybe the board would like to evaluate.
And how does that work if that property were to transfer ownership? I mean, there's no real guarantee if we stipulated that
Yeah.
with the current owner, correct?
It would be a condition of approval, and it would involve careful documentation to make sure if somebody came in unrelated to the current ownership. It'd have to be something on my end with permitting. I'd have to identify, restrict it with a flag of some sort that said that it needs to go see the approval at 7 Bellevue.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, do we have the applicant available to present the project?
My name is Gary Armour. Do I need this? Can you all hear me? Okay. Hello? Okay. My name is Gary Armour. My family came to California. My dad was an architect and graduated from Cranbrook in 1949. Bundled his wife and two boys into the back of a Plymouth, drove to California, and went to work for John Graham and Company to design and build the 43-story Wells Fargo Bank. In 1950, he started looking around for property, found a property to acquire. In 1951, he purchased 2 lots on a rural 2-lane road, San Pedro Road. In 1952, he hired Phil Drath, who lived up the street, local contractor, to build a 1,200 square foot post and beam house with a beautiful view of Mount Tam and the canal. We lived there for 15 years. 2 years were actually spent away from the house in Hawaii when my dad did the Hawaii State Capitol building. In 1968, the house was taken under eminent domain by the County of Marin to widen the road from 2 lanes to 4. The house was taken down. The hillside was graded at a 2-to-1 slope from the property line, which was now 10,000 square feet less than we had before with the house up. In 1960, 10 years later, 1978, I was involved in investment real estate and noticed that the adjacent lot at 23 had come on the market. I called up my dad and tried to get him to buy that lot. Having spent $4,000 in 1951 for 2 lots, he wasn't too excited about paying $110,000 for 1 lot. The good news is that lot had a roadway graded up. I only found out after he passed away that the owner of the lot had offered access if he would pay part of the cost of paving that road and putting up retaining walls. I wish he had done so. The cost of a new driveway, grading, retaining walls, and so forth is close to $300,000 now for my 2 lots. I have endeavored over the years to try to maintain the health of the oak trees. We had sudden oak death in the 90s come through. We lost several trees to that, one very close to the Gutierrez property. At the time I contacted University of California at Davis. They were spearheading the sudden oak death evaluation and containment scenario. That is now transferred over to UC Berkeley, I understand. I took pictures of the trees that were affected on the property, and I believe you have one view of the top of the hill. Let me pull this out, which is this view. And you have that on foam core somewhere there. The 3 trees at the top of the hill, one is with a bay tree growing up through the middle of it. That is identified as, I believe, tree number 3 under the tree report, which was done in 2016. Because the bay trees spread the pathogen that kills the oaks and causes sudden oak death, it was suggested that I take that tree down, remove all traces of the bay laurel, which is what spreads the disease, and the adjacent 2 trees, which seem to be healthy, but the canopies were all touching. We are now 72 days away from another IJ report that indicates sudden oak death is back in Marin and Sonoma County. Had I not taken the tree down adjacent to the Gutierrez lot line back in 1990, I guess it was, and capped that off, we might have lost more oak trees on the hillside. In the process of creating a design, we've had several constraints. The major one was a driveway up that would fit in with the city of San Rafael engineering specs. We endeavored to get the grades right with the fire department, made several meetings with them. The other concern was cut and fill. We had engineering studies on the property to minimize the amount of haul off, which we have now gotten down to 0. It will all be redispersed on both lots. The location of the house, Ken Taub, my architect, can address. We moved the house several times trying to avoid interference with the oak trees that were on the site. The difficulty there is the balance of cut and fill with retaining wall height. The Department of Public Works informed me we needed a driveway 20 feet wide, which would have meant increasing heights. I pointed out that the entire roadway of Bellevue Avenue was 18 feet average in width and served 7 homes. Several of the driveways One in particular supports 4 homes, which is 11 feet wide. So we've had to have a little bit of a dance with the city and requirement that they gave to us. The parking requirement was one. We tried to make provisions where we had down slope parking garages available. That was a visible problem, and also the parking restrictions of additional spaces per house meant we had to have guest parking of 4 spaces. So long story short, we've tried to do a very efficient and also thoughtful job of placing the house on the site, which works with the roadway, which was the primary constraint, sits in the trees so that the average height of the roof, I believe, is no higher than 23 feet, and the house is stepped back up the hillside. Visually gives a southern exposure to the Gutierrez property of a wall of shingles with 2 clerestory windows. One of the views that's on the storyboard there is that we met with the Gutierrezes, and they wanted to have a 6-foot patio door facing their property screened. I offered to do an infill planting on their side of the fence, which would allow them to water them now and get them up and going. The long and the short of it is, when you build something, the landscaping is the last to go in. We have no water access until we get our final permit. The water meter that had been with our number 1 Bellevue house was never restored by the county. And my dad's lawyer passed away in the midst of trying to get that restored. I worked for 7 years for the water district as a construction inspector at one point, and tried to get the meter put back in, and was told that basically without a building permit that would be not possible. So we have tried our best to make the house fit in the neighborhood. I have a long history, 69 years of ownership. We started out with a 1,200 square foot house on a rural road when Loch Lomond was an apple orchard, and basically all of the land down below Sea Strand was undeveloped. We are now the last buildable lot in that neighborhood, and we are trying very hard to deal with the constraints that are in front of us. I'll be glad to answer any questions you may have.
You talked about one of your goals was to balance the cut and fill, and I'm curious that the uncovered parking spots 3 and 4, are they there partially to help you meet that goal of balancing your cut and fill? Because obviously you're using a lot of fill there.
We're talking about the guest parking?
Right, I'm talking about cut and fill and parking in conjunction with each other. Is part of the motivation for having parking spaces 3 and 4
Yes.
partially driven by balancing your cut and fill?
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you. The parking spaces on 3 and 4.
Or have a lot of fill to be able to accomplish that, and you're trying to balance your cut and fill? Was that part of the motivation of those 2 parking spaces?
Well, it worked out that way, but basically the first constraint was to eliminate a lot of haul-off from the site. When we generated the numbers for retaining wall heights and cut and fill based on the Department of Public Works, we were going to be over 10,000 cubic feet, which would have meant an EIR procedure. We felt that in talking with the engineers, if we filled the bowl below the house and added to the site on the adjacent lot to level it out as it slopes towards San Pedro Road slightly,
Yeah, that was
we could basically
next
balance
question.
all that and make it work.
Right, so you are moving some of the soil onto the adjacent lot? So, I mean, you have a unique situation there where you have both lots, so you can also use one lot to help solve the problems of
Well,
the
that's
other
what
lot.
we finally resolved would be the way to go.
So you are moving some of the off-haul onto the other lot
That's correct.
already? Okay.
I have a question regarding the guest parking.
Yes?
Staff had really posed the question about removing the guest parking
Right.
and saving those 3 trees.
Mhm.
And what is your preference, or where do you see, as an applicant,
If I can save those trees and eliminate the guest parking, I would do so.
so you don't see the elimination of those 2 spots as a hindrance to the development of the other site or this site?
Well, the only hesitancy I have there is that that site also requires 2 spaces. So basically, that's why we have 4. I wouldn't want to put myself in a position of being denied to build a second house on the adjacent lot, which is a lot of record, on the basis that it lacks parking.
Okay.
So that's about as close as I can get to that scenario.
Okay.
If you can assure me that there's a waiver for that lot, then I would suggest, yeah, I would prefer to keep the oak trees.
Do you see another, where else you could put some additional trees to come up to the required minimum?
Yes, we have a revised plan.
Well, I think you added 3 trees, right?
Well, first of all,
You were only providing 5 trees, and then the new plan has provided 3 more, is that correct? So you have a total of 8 now?
I believe it included 5 more.
Oh,
Can you review the new plan with us?
The
Just
plan is right there.
we have the new plan. We just received it at the beginning of the meeting, so it'd be good to understand what modifications you made since we received our documents on Friday, so we can understand what the impact, like what you were trying to achieve.
Actually,
If you have,
is
like-
your landscape architect here? Because I have a lot of
Yeah,
questions
let me
for
let
him.
Jake maybe talk about that.
That'd be great.
I have a bunch of questions for you.
The situation was that on Friday, we received the staff report comments. On Monday, went to talk to the landscape architect, Pete Peterson, and Jake was working on that project prior. So we had come up with an alternate plan based on the Gutierrez comments through his lawyer, Len Rifkin, and also the City of San Rafael staff report to try to ameliorate the situation and make everybody happy.
That's really helpful. Yeah, it'd be good to hear his review of it and be able to ask him questions. I appreciate it. Thank you.
all right, my question then is still is, you originally were proposing to add 5 replacement trees.
Right. The original plan had 5 replacement oak trees, and now the revised plan has a total of 8.
8.
Yeah.
Now, my question was, are there other places that you can put more? Because right now, there's 30 oak trees required to be planted. And even if we take out the parking, that'll save 2 trees?
According to the staff report, would possibly save 3 trees.
3 trees, okay. So it would still reduce your required minimum to 20 trees. And right now, you're proposing 8 trees. So is there additional places you could plant trees?
Right. We reviewed the site really well with Pete Peterson from our office, and we placed the additional trees along the south property line by the Gutierrez property, and then we also placed one more along the southeastern corner. Other areas we found difficult just because there's a lot of other existing oak trees, and we wanted to be mindful of not creating another fire hazard, as well as maintaining some views out to the water.
Can you speak into the microphone, because we're recording this meeting? Thank you.
3 of the trees on the report that was done in 2016 are no longer on the site. The reason for that is the the third tree was the one which was an oak tree with a bay growing up, and the canopies of the trees were all touching. If you look at the photograph of the tree at the top of the hill, that's one of the 3 trees involved in the report of 2016.
But the requirement by the city is still that 30 trees, or is it then 27 trees? Or I guess it'd be less than that.
Well, there were 10 trees identified on the site plan and under the tree report.
Are there still
The
10
tree
trees
report
there?
was done in 2016. After that fact, I found out that the bay trees were spreading the disease. This is, an ongoing evolution of information. I cut down the balance of the oak tree with the bay laurel growing through it, got it all off-site, and cut the 2 smaller trees where the canopies were touching right next to it to open up the site and keep distance away from the other more mature trees.
So how many
basically
trees are
under
there
this,
now existing?
I'm sorry, basically under this report, there are only 7 trees that are still extant on the site that are in the path of development.
So then there would be, if there's 7 existing trees,
That's correct.
then the requirement would be 21 to replace.
That's right.
And you're replacing 8. Is that correct? Under this new plan?
Well, I think there are 12 trees in total.
Well, we need some clarification on that then, because I only see 8. Your landscape architect says 8. Where's the other 4?
We're proposing 8 oak trees and then 3 Japanese maple trees closer to the house. So a total of 11.
Are those acceptable for the replacement trees?
No, they're supposed to be native and also in kind, so the 8 would count.
Yeah, so it's only 8.
So, Steve, a point of clarification, with the 3-to-1 replacement ratio, if you're removing an oak, you have to replace it with oak, or just 3 significant trees?
You're supposed to replace it in kind, essentially, so you want to have both native, but you're replacing it with natives if they're not native that you're taking out, but the preference is you're taking down an oak to replace it with an oak.
Okay.
Would it be possible to meet the fire department requirements and add 20 additional trees to this site?
I believe that the applicant and the owner have submitted a letter from, I think it's Pete Peterson, that's indicated that the site will not accept that many replacement trees.
I think I recall that now. Thank you, yeah.
I would like to weigh in on that myself. I think it's ridiculous to put 30 oak trees on this piece of property.
Well, the only other question then would be, the owner said that he was willing to put trees on the other property, right? Is that correct or not?
Yeah, basically, not all of the oak trees are shown on the adjacent lot. We have,
Let's ask this question then. Can there be more oak trees put on the adjacent lot?
I believe so.
How many more?
I'm not an arborist, so I really don't know, but
Does the landscape
basically, we have
architect
a small footprint available on that site, even with the lot line adjustment.
But
The
you
views
put
are
a lot of fill on the site now too, right? Or you're going to, because
yes.
you've got a lot of cut that you don't want to off-haul.
That's correct.
So you're putting a lot of fill on that site. You could also put some trees on that site. Does the landscape architect know how many trees could be put on that site?
I believe that with the building pad of about 3,000 square feet, rectangular running east and west, we could put some trees on the downhill side, which would benefit the folks in Villarreal looking over and the people driving by San Pedro Road, which would also provide a noise break and some other interest to the hillside.
You know, Larry, I think if the second project came before us, regardless of how we resolve this, we would ask for screening on that north slope regardless.
Probably. I'm just trying to determine if what is the practical number of trees that can be added
Well-
to both these sites.
30, I'm with,
Maybe there's not 30, maybe there's not 21, but there's some number, maybe more than 8.
I'm with Don. 30 trees is absolutely, an illogical number to put on this site. But what we've done in the past, and what they're doing a little bit already, is usually it's required to put a 15-gallon tree. They're putting 24-gallon trees. 24-inch
box.
box trees. Sometimes we've even upsized the shrub sizes to kind of compensate for the fact that you can't put that many trees on a site logically. So those are probably a couple of the things we should be looking at. Bigger trees, bigger shrubs.
Because what I assume is that the 3-to-1 is trying to make up for the size, right? Of trees that are being replaced. So if we do have a larger,
I don't know if that's the reason,
Gallon
or I
size.
think maybe partly because it's, if you plant 3, maybe some of them will die. So that maybe you only get 2
yeah.
to 1 replacement.
Something to keep in mind that the 3-to-1 ratio really is an arbitrary number. It's the board's responsibility or purview to find what is the appropriate number that the site would hold. Typically, if it's going to be less than the 3-to-1 ratio, we ask the applicant to evaluate it with an arborist report. In this case, the applicant has done that, and it's been coming back that the landscape plan is essentially the maximum replacement that he believes the site will hold, this particular site will hold.
Well, I think this is also further complicated, and a question I have for the LA is that under your vegetative management plan narrative, one of your notes are the trees should be planted such that when mature, the crown should have a 10-foot separation at minimum. So, we're already looking at your plan where we have overlapping canopies, so, the both landscape plans that I've seen so far don't even correspond to your, or resolve with your narrative and your. So,
Right, it was a fine line, just
it
trying to-
makes it makes it so you've even got to pull the trees apart more than they are on your plan already,
Right.
if you follow your narrative.
We were also just trying to adhere to your guys' requirements as far as providing enough mitigation trees, but we did keep that in mind, and also, trying to also stay away from the buildings as well.
Is the narrative a requirement by the fire department, or is that one of your own guidelines?
It's a guideline from the fire department.
So you're not nearly in compliance with that guideline as your plan is such?
Right, I can't speak to the fire department. Once they review the plans, they'll make that determination.
So-
It's just a guideline.
So they have not reviewed the plans yet?
I don't believe so.
Okay, because I think there's a couple of other things they're going to have problems with on this, but we'll get to that later.
Basically, when I had the tree report done, the concern there was that we had actually too many oak trees in too close a concentration as their canopies were touching, and they were stressed because of that. With the aspect of sudden oak death coming back into Marin County and Sonoma County, I would worry that once an oak tree dies, it becomes the worst fire hazard. And there are actually other trees that may be more beneficial in terms of fireproofness and staying away from the house.
Yeah, SOD has never left the county. It's been with us every year. The weather conditions, it's worse some years than others, but it's been with us every year.
Right.
It hasn't gone anywhere.
Well, I'm neither an arborist or a landscape designer, so I will leave that up to the professionals.
Yeah. And then what happens with your bay trees, the bay trees an intermediate host, it can have SOD and not get killed, but it spreads from bay trees to oak
Right,
trees.
and so can eucalyptus, which are south of the property.
Right.
Do we have any more questions?
So I had a couple more.
I had
I'm
one
sorry.
more comment on these 3 trees. If you look at the grading, and I've done this very quickly, the roadway is about 6 to 8 feet above ground level. There's a retaining wall there. These trees are down below, and they're very, if there was a new wall just drawn across and we eliminate these 2 parking stalls, the roadway would actually be in the crown of those trees we're trying to save. you couldn't drive underneath them. So I don't think that's really a viable idea. I'd rather see the 2 parking spaces personally.
Another question I had on your vegetative management plan, when you say the oak trees will have annual deadheading, what is that? It's like the first point you make under your narrative. I've never heard that term before. Does that just mean you're removing deadwood annually?
Right, that note was in reference to the existing oak trees, just to make sure that, yeah, we would remove any limbs that would possibly like be closer to 10 feet to the property or the house.
Okay, so that's not something that's done annually. Necessarily.
Yeah, not necessarily, but it would be checked annually.
Okay, thanks.
Anything else from the board members? Or the applicant?
Excuse me.
Okay. I think we'll go ahead and,
I have more questions.
Oh, okay.
Is
Yeah.
your architect here, or your engineer, or is there anybody I can ask questions about the driveway? So I'm a little confused on your plans, because some of your plans show that you've got walls below the driveway, and then when I look at your sections, you basically have your driveway and a curb, and it's all kind of perched on fill?
Yes.
So it's perched on fill, or you have a wall?
The driveway cut will
Below
be
the
in the
driveway,
hillside.
walls below the driveway.
Basically, the fill will be on the lower side of the driveway, filling in the bowl.
Right, so there aren't,
Engineering is such that we balance the cut with the fill. The fill will be compacted and stabilized.
so are there walls below the
Driveway
driveway?
itself will be cut into the hillside.
So are there walls below the driveway, or is it just compacted fill? 'Cause
Basically,
You
it's
have drawings showing both.
curb with curb cut. The section where the parking is will be filled and have a low retaining wall
And we'll have a
on
retaining
the low
wall?
side.
Your
Can I just-
sections don't show walls at all.
At section BB that goes through the garage and through the driveway,
CC, DD, they all just show, they don't show walls.
no, that's what I'm saying, the civil engineer indicates almost a 5-foot wall. That's not shown on your sections at all. 5 foot. Here's a 5-foot.
On one drawing. Not on these. CC doesn't even show the bioswale. While you're looking that up, another quick question for the L8. Are the bioswales planted?
The section B, yeah.
Section BB. On sheet A1.
Right now, we're not showing any new landscaping in the bioswales.
But there will be?
Yeah, we can provide that.
Okay.
And then on section DD, at the top, again, it goes through the wall on that driveway paving. There's a 5-foot wall there as far as the civil's concerned, but on your sections, none of those walls appear.
Well, it shows rock boulder on the lower side.
Yeah, I see that.
That's correct.
Why? Yeah,
CC also goes through a bioswale, which isn't shown on your section.
So it is filled up to the pad. Yes, that's correct.
Well, your grading plan shows some fairly significant walls, and your sections show no walls at all. Which one's correct?
And I have to reference the engineering plan here. At the lower side of that, from the boulder up to the pad itself, is fill.
No, I understand that, but at the top of that fill, according to your site plan,
Yes.
there's a 5-foot wall up there. And that wall is shown, illustrated on section A 1.1 with the 6-inch curb.
I think we're
I
just
think
finding
we have to-
inconsistencies between the plans, and we just need to likely
Yeah,
get them updated so they're accurately coordinated.
Yes.
Yeah.
But which one,
Which is right.
for our purposes tonight, which drawing is right? It has walls or it doesn't have walls? Because I think one of staff's points was if we kept the 3 trees, the walls would get lower. So I think staff was expecting there to be walls at the lower end of the drive,
You
the bottom
can't,
end of the driveway.
you're not gonna be able to save those trees.
Because I'm also a little
Are these-
confused because then, so if all the rest of the driveway has engineered walls and then you get to the bioswale and the bioswale only has a dry stack wall? And I'm not an engineer, but that would make me pretty nervous to have a section
I
of your
think the
driveway
intent there
unsupported.
was to use the fill, compact it, build the parking spaces that were guest spaces on top of that fill.
Do we have the architect or the engineer here tonight?
I have the architect here. Maybe he can address this.
That would be helpful. Yeah.
Ken? Talking about this section.
My name is Ken Taub. I'm the architect of the project. It's been a couple of years since I designed this, so there was some engineering after we've done some preliminary architectural sections, so it's probably a combination of both. We're probably a small wall on top of fill, which is, I know it's not shown correctly.
No.
So
So
it's just never
sheet-
coordinated with the civil engineer.
Sheet A1-1, that's
Right.
your drawing,
That's
is
my
that
drawing.
correct?
That's correct. When we pushed the wall back, or let's say toward the west, to accommodate the bioswale material, that would make the wall probably a little bit taller. And so it was just never corrected. So what's correct is the civil engineering.
That's what I'm looking
Yeah,
at, but on the
right.
civil engineering, there's no wall shown anywhere.
Okay, well, it probably would require one, a small wall.
No, on their drawings, on the plan sheets, they have heights of wall,
Right.
4.8, 4.7, but what I'm saying is those walls are not shown on any of these sections.
Yeah, I think basically the wall is there and it's backfilled against it to reduce its apparent height.
No, I don't think so. They're
Well,
giving them
that-
top of wall and they're giving
Yeah,
them a finished grade.
Yeah, Gary is correct. That's the way we showed it, but in reality, it's probably going to be a short retaining wall.
Okay.
No, by
I'm-
short, I think some of them were like 5, 6, 7 feet.
No,
Some
it
of them
wouldn't
were
be
pretty
that
big.
much.
I mean,
Unless
we're
you
just
take
going
out
in
the parking
circles here.
spaces, then the wall would get taller. So,
'Cause you
is there any
also-
questions about the architecture while I'm up here?
Well, I mean, is there anybody that can,
I have a question.
Sure.
The adjacent lot
Right.
has this flat pad on it that's being created because of the fill.
Hollow?
Correct.
I've looked at this.
And that's supposed to, is that going to be the building pad for the future house?
Yes.
Has the future house been designed?
Just very roughly.
Conceptually?
Yeah, conceptually.
Is the future house similar in size?
No, it's much smaller.
And that driveway is meant to serve both houses.
Yes, correct.
And I heard something from Gary that you would still have to provide additional off-street parking in addition to the 2 cars on that lot too, correct?
No, we accommodated that on this lot for future, for the future site.
Oh, so these 4
Yes.
additional spaces are only required, are not all required for this lot?
Correct,
Correct. So if you
just
took
2
out
are, and then,
correct.
I see, okay.
yeah, so
So
what,
if we lost 2 of the additional parking spaces,
This site would be compliant.
this side would be compliant, but the next one might not.
Correct.
that's it.
That was my question.
Okay, thank you.
Steve, is it possible to get the grading plan up there? Okay, so I think this is part of the confusion. If you want to look at your drawing here, you have 3 sets of walls there, and they're all engineered walls. When you look at some of your other drawings, you know, the most downslope wall on your bioswale, for example, is a dry stacked wall. So, I mean, I don't even know how to read your drawings because they're just all over the place. So I don't know which one it is. I don't know if they're dry stacked, I don't know if they're engineered. I don't know if you have 2 sets of engineered walls around the bioswale, or you have no walls at all. I mean, I would think that's kind of important.
Well, I think it is, but we're not into working drawings. What we were trying to present is a conceptual idea. We realize that when a final grading plan is developed, it might require some structural walls in the front. And then we would probably do what we did with the other walls. It'd be a plaster wall to conform, so they would be consistent. But
Well, I mean, this isn't a conceptual review, this is a formal review, and the walls sort of affect the way the project looks. So I think that's actually
Well-
information we would want.
Right, but we can backfill up against the wall at a 2-to-1, so we can eliminate a lot of that wall.
So you're saying if there are walls, we're not gonna see them anyway,
Well, you'll,
largely?
because they're gonna be structural, holding back, but that's a decision the structural engineer will have to make.
Right, so you're saying there will be walls there, but we may not see them?
There will be walls, but you won't see much of them.
Correct. Okay,
Right.
good, thanks.
Sure.
Any other questions on the grading and the landscape? We beat this one to death. There's a lot of unknowns, I think, we have to figure out. Okay. So are there any comments from the public?
Good evening, members of the board. My name is Len Rifkind, and I represent the Gutierrezes, who live next door at 23 Bellevue. And I've been listening with attention to all the board's questions over the last 50 minutes, and so obviously this project is not ready for prime time yet. And so I'm going to hopefully assume that what the board is going to do is ask for plans that at a formal design review that we can tell what, for example, the walls are going to look like. I did hear Board Member Blaney's comments, and I agree with all of you that 30 trees doesn't make sense for this site. You know, we have fire hazards, and so I'm not a landscape architect, but I was struck in going to the Gutierrez property and meeting with Mr. Armour and as a member of the public, how beautiful it is as you drive up Bellevue and this beautiful oak woodland. And so I'm asking the design review board and I've mentioned in my letter to the board, and I can cite the various municipal code sections, that we do as good a job as we can to preserve as many of the significant, greater than 6 inches in diameter oak trees as is feasible. I heard Mr. Blaney say, hey, if you take away the the parking spaces, the guest parking spaces, is not going to save those 3 trees. I can't read the plans well enough to know I accept that as a representation. My request is that this board preserve as many of the significant oak trees as possible. And in order to do that, as staff mentioned in the staff in presentation of the staff report, you have multiple factors in order to accomplish that. We have a 4,500 square foot house. That's not the gospel. It doesn't necessarily have to be a 4,500 square foot house. We don't have to have a 20-plus foot driveway serving 2 properties that meets current fire code. Maybe there's another way to design a separate driveway for the other lot. It seems like we're doing all kinds of accommodations to accomplish a proposal or a project that's not even before this board. The other lot is not formally presented, yet we're doing cut and fill on it. We're talking about putting trees on it. We're creating access for it on this property. I'm confused. Maybe there should be an application for that at the same time so that they can be planned together. So altogether, between the size of the house, the size of the driveway, the trees, there's a big mix here. And I think that this board can weigh in and give good recommendations to the project applicant how to balance all of those things. It doesn't seem like it's right yet. I mean, we have significant impacts. As staff notes in the staff report, we've got a 4,500 square foot house that's effectively on a ridge line. It's not on the, it's on the flat building pad. Maybe that's the best place to put it, but now it sticks up. It's going to be visible from San Pedro Road. It's going to be visible from Seaview. It's going to be visible from a lot of places. For my clients next door, there's a healthy distance. And by the way, my specific request for the Gutierrez is while there's no, the only impact that I can see for this house really is there's a master bedroom. I think there's 2 master bedroom suites in this project. One of the master bedrooms, when you go out, it has a patio on the I want to say east side. And so when you go on that patio, out those French doors, it has a direct view looking south towards the Gutierrez property. And so I had requested some more screening along the common boundary fence that exists right now. And in the modified landscape plan, I saw that they've added, went from I think 5 to 9 CEOQUA was the jargon on the landscape plan, and they're 5-galloners, and so I'd like to see on behalf of the Gutierrez's better. I don't know if that's the right species. I'm not a landscape architect. Whatever is the appropriate species is fine. 5 gallons seems kind of small if the goal is to kind of create some screening along the common boundary fence there. So that's my request, is for a wholesale reconsideration of the entire project that I don't think is ready for prime time. The plans aren't ready. I don't think anything should be cemented here, and I encourage the board to use its creative collective juices to give good feedback to this applicant, to come back with a project that will better preserve the oak trees on this site. Last comment, and I appreciate your courtesy. We're dealing with an arborist report that's 4 years old. I'm not used to seeing that. Why are we talking about an arborist report that says normal vitality for 10 trees, yet we learned tonight there's only 7, and I'm concerned how much care has been given for some of the remaining trees over that time, because obviously it would be to the advantage of the applicant to lose more trees, so we're not even talking about them. And so this neighborhood it's a woodland. It's beautiful when you drive up Bellevue. I encourage this board to try, as is required in multiple provisions of your municipal code, to preserve as many of the oak trees as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you make sure to sign in when you
Oh, sure.
when you leave the
Any
podium?
questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
No worries. Good evening, members of the board. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you. My name is David Jacobson. I live at 47 Bellevue, and I live directly above the Gutierrez. I, like the owner of the property, have lived here pretty much my whole life, 60 years, and am very familiar with the street. It's a very unique street, as I'm sure you know. It's a heavily wooded oak forest, and this particular site is at the very beginning of the street. I would ask you for two considerations tonight. One, when the applicant, hopefully the applicant has to come back so they can resolve these issues that you've all discussed. When they do, if they could please bring back actual elevations of the walls. I've experienced quite a bit of development in Country Club and Dominican, where I've lived in various places in the neighborhood, and people oftentimes come to you and represent a small wall, and then when it goes in, everybody is shocked and goes, wow, that's a lot bigger than we thought. And number two, I'd like to see recommend a second version by taking out those 2 parking spaces that are for the benefit of the other lot that hasn't even been applied for, and see the same thing. We can compare and contrast the elevations. I lived on the street when the Gutierrez house was built, and the developer there was very careful to try and stage all those walls. He put them all in, covered them all in rock. He set the trees in certain ways to really minimize it. And if you look at that driveway, there was great care. That driveway, his cost was well over $100,000, and that was 25 years ago. So it was time and effort put into it to preserve that beautiful forest, which is very unique in that end of town. So those would be my two asks for consideration. Is one is specifically the elevation of the existing, and two, an elevation with if the 2 parking spaces were removed. There's one other small tweak that I might ask for consideration on, is when a wall goes in, maybe a cascading wall where landscaping can be put in between, so an 8-foot wall becomes, a 6-foot and a 4-foot, and then there's a bench to put some planting in. Again, softening up, because you're driving through this beautifully manicured oak forest, and if we end up with a bunch of big walls, that would probably take away from a lot of the beauty of that particular area. In regards to the 30 trees and the 20 trees, just a rough calculation, he has 20,000 square foot, minus 3,000 footprint, that's 17,000 square feet. He's got room for some trees in 17,000 square feet, more than 5. So that just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. That's 4,000 square foot per tree. So I'm not an arborist either, but I'm above average in algebra. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Oh, can you make sure to sign in so we have your name?
My name, I'm in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead while signing in is going on next to me. My name is Lori Gregg. I live at 33 Bayway, which is south downhill from the subject property. My lot is a flag lot that comes up from Bayway and goes up and is below the Bellevue, and my property goes all the way up to Bellevue. I sit higher than the street on Bayway, though, by a good shot. I meant to have written comments put in, and I apologize. I did not get them in time for some good reasons. So let me just go ahead with what I have written, and then I will submit it to my house and garden below Bellevue Avenue is just slightly southwest of the site of this new construction project. My property is one of several flag lots that come up from Bayway. I am in heart a realist about the coming development of what has until this time been a lovely undeveloped hillside on Bellevue. I do not stand in opposition of a house being built on the site. The building plans for a new house and engineered driveway on the site property indicate what is to be expected, a visual impact for properties below it. Some also, mine is below it. My view is, unfortunately, of the swath that has been cleared for this coming house that used to be hillside or wooded. When I moved into my home in 2009, this was all all of the hillside, in my view, up there, was trees and chaparral. It is now, a swath has been cleared on a slant that is going to have, is very much in keeping with where this site is going. I watched trees get cut down. I went to Mr. Armour when he was cutting down or clearing more of the swath in 2017 above me, and expressed my concern and horror. And he told me about the sudden oak death. I only want to tell you that that he has not done any work on this property that I know of since I moved in 2009, except to clear trees and chaparral. And I don't think anything prior to that. I don't know. That's not my business. But his guardianship, stewardship is just been turned on in full force in the years since I moved in. I will lose a very beautiful view of just undeveloped hillside. That is what I look at. I have no, the only thing that goes by me are cars on Bellevue up above. My upper lot is undeveloped. My house is down on a level pad, and the rest of anything that goes uphill is undeveloped. It's also, I think, designated in the WUI wild interface. The house size is extremely larger than I expected it would be, and that just rings a few bells, alarm bells. However, whatever's going in there is going to impact my view, and also impact a lot of other things in my living. I am concerned in being here at this meeting about all of the question marks and inconsistencies that I'm hearing about the plans that are right now now on record. I have not received any plans from Mr. Armour. I have not, except for, pardon me, in 2017 he sent me sketches when I introduced myself to him. And also I had access to previous plans in 2017, or maybe that was 18, when he had plans that are not these that are being submitted, that I could look at the planning office. I had to go to the planning office to see the plans for this project. I was not able to carry away any of the plans. So I'm working on just I don't have a lawyer, I don't have expertise in engineering, but I can tell you that the western facing portions of this project are very, very sensitive to me, but also in matters of elevation, engineering, drainage, and impacts on the hillside vegetation, trees. I request that in any future plans that come forward on this project, that the architect consider also the impact of both noise and artificial light that will be coming down from above and onto the properties. There are 3 homes below that are below these 2 parcels that will be affected by any building there. I ask that certain things, there be mitigation efforts made to have the lights not be intruding into the backyards, our backyards that are downhill, the level parts. My house, my home, everything will be I will be looking at the back of this house. The parking, I also will be looking at the driveway and parking area. The driveway access will be right above my property and go across just above my property, and then crosses my view from my property, even though my property is not immediately south of there. it will all be in view. So any retaining walls, anything like that, are concerning. The accuracy of plans really matters to me, and also the assurance that the engineering is done appropriately and well. Drainage is a very big issue, but also just the solidness of this construction. I don't want anything to happen. Downhill. One other thing that I was going to request is that a contractor please do something also in thinking about the noise impacts that are going to be emanating from the house. And if there are any things, I don't know what they would be, that can mitigate some of the noise that will transfer downhill into my home and backyard. There is nothing I can do myself as I live. What is planted is down below, and I have an undeveloped hillside in a woolly area, so I can't plant any more trees. So that mitigation and attenuation of sound and light would be my request for something about the actual western-facing fronts of the or elevations of this house. And I really think that the landscaping plan is key to how this house will fit into the neighborhood. The fact that it is coming in on land that has never had any home built on it before, and will significantly impact the view of everyone going up the hill from San Pedro and up my hill. Let me think if there's anything else. Again, emphasize the engineering plan. And also, I just, Mr. Armour, I'm sure, I know is sincere in everything he's doing. He has not been in communication with me, which he knows I am concerned about. And our conversations have been, he cut off conversation after we spoke in 2017. So I am concerned about what he's doing and the fact that it is happening with very little oversight that I can give it. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you make sure to, sign your name? Thanks. Okay, I think we're going to close the public meeting. Oh, we have enough. Yeah, come on up.
I had the similar experience about the cutting of the trees and the creation of that open space. Again, not an arborist, but I walked up there when he was cutting the trees. They looked like nice, healthy trees. I asked him why he's cutting the trees. He says, well, we're putting in a driveway. I said, can you call the owner? He called the owner on the phone, talked to, I guess it was Gary on the phone. I didn't know who it was. He said, well, we're just cutting the trees. We need to make room. Of course, we have some quote-unquote sudden oak death, but I go, I don't know, I'm standing here. These look like really healthy trees. Maybe there's one that's not so healthy, but I think there's some effort's been going on to kind of pre-stage this a little bit. And I understand that's logical. He needs to get a driveway, and I fully accept that. But again, need to mitigate all these changes and try and screen it so it doesn't look like just a big mass of concrete when it's come in. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. One more comment? Okay, let's make it quick. Yeah, thanks.
And it's just more emphasis on what was just said, that this land has been pre-staged for building, and that in the last 3 years I've seen now it cleared, swath cleared. If you go up to the site, you will see there's no vegetation except what's grown up since it was cleared. And it was wooded and chaparral covered when I moved in. And it's just, it pains me to think that the trees that have already been cut down, and it pains me to think of what further impact is going to come to the landscape on that hillside. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We're going to close the public portion of this meeting, and just making sure the board doesn't have any questions of staff. We can get on to comments. Dawn, do you want to start?
Okay. I've already weighed in on the number of tree issue. And it's funny because this whole 3-to-1 ratio came down from the county about, I don't know, 20 years ago. The city, the planning department has their recommendations, and then the fire department has their recommendations. And the bad news is all three of them conflict with one another. So we end up with these plans all the time, really don't know what to do. They talk about ladders underneath these trees, and I see all this shrub planting underneath these nice new oak trees, so the fire department's not going to buy that. But all the neighbors want more screening because they can look into somebody's bedroom, so that requires more trees. So that's the balance we play with. That's what we go back and forth on. It's not easy. There's all kind of ordinances on noise and all these other things that you'll be protected by, so you shouldn't be too worried about that. It's a piece of private property. There's a house going to be built there someday, and then there's probably going to be another house down below. So it's going to be a noisy area for a while. I have no problem with the house. I don't have a problem with the size of the house. I don't have a problem with the driveway. My biggest concerns about this submittal is it doesn't make any sense to me, and I can't make a judgment. I think you need to go back with the civil engineer and work out all these heights of walls. One of the things the planning department has asked us to do is to talk about these walls, but we don't see any walls here. So that's going to be critical for me to look at these walls and see, you know, how they're being presented and built on the site.
Well, the first thing I would say, when you have a project like that and tree removal is a real important aspect of it, can you actually mark the trees that are being removed? Because I can tell you when you're stumbling around with a set of drawings on a hillside, it was really hard to reconcile what trees are on site with the trees on your drawing. So if you know, there's a million ways you can put some tape on it, a little spot of paint or something. But if this comes back to us, and I got to go to the site, I'd certainly want to know exactly what we're looking at. I'm with Don. I don't really have any problem with the house. I think it's actually pretty well designed. It's pretty well articulated. For me, it's mostly the landscape, and I mean, you've added more trees, and it's in conflict with your own narrative on vegetative management that mature trees have to have at least a 10-foot spacing between them. So there's some point, some of the oak trees are even planted like 12 feet on center, and you're talking about a tree that can get maybe a 50-foot canopy. They're 12 feet on center, so obviously you don't meet that narrative. Don brought up the whole fire ladder thing. The fire department's not going to allow you to plant shrubs under these trees. And the other thing is with your established oak trees, the last thing you want to do is start planting trees and irrigating them under established oak trees. You can get away with that underneath new oak trees, but not mature oak trees. And I think the other big philosophical question for me is full disclosure, I grew up in Wisconsin where we had all these beautiful towns with American elms and Dutch elm disease came through and wiped out whole cities. So, sudden oak death never left Marin. It just, when we had some of the drought years, it subsided somewhat, but it was always there. It's a soil-borne disease. It just waits for the right conditions and then it becomes active again. So we're never getting rid of sudden oak death. So for me, the whole thing is so now we know we have the incidence of disease here. I don't even want to see a monoculture when there isn't a known disease pressure. So now you have all this disease pressure and we're creating a monoculture on this and we're just hoping these trees survive somehow. And I know 3-to-1 means they can be native trees other than oaks, but quite frankly, there's not a lot of really great choices, redwood trees and oak trees and madrones. Madrones also get sudden oak death, and Shea River oaks also get sudden oak death, and obviously live oaks do. So I would actually probably recommend something a little more radical, that we maybe even consider some non-native species. Because it almost doesn't, from a horticulture standpoint, to just keep throwing oak trees out on these properties where we're all worrying about them dying. And the other thing is on plant sizes. You know, it's illogical to put 30 trees there, and we've done this in the past. You make the tree sizes larger. If you can't put 30 trees back and you're only planting 8, maybe you make them 36-inch box trees, and make your shrubs 15 gallons. Sometimes you can find them, sometimes you can't. I know. I looked up Ceanothus concha today, and I know where you can find 15-gallon Ceanothus. The other problem is the whole, I love the plants that you put on here, but a lot of them want full sun. So, you know, you're planting plants that want full sun underneath oak trees. The Ceanothus wants full sun. The flannel bush wants full sun. Flannel bush is actually pretty hard to keep alive. It has some of the fussiest water requirements I've ever seen. You can't water a flannel bush next to the trunk. It wants to be watered like 5, 6, 7 feet out from its trunk. So it wants full sun. It's hard to keep alive because of the water requirements. So I think there's better plants out there than that. I love the plant, but horticulturally, it's a real tough one. And then again, you know, if you need to keep your branches 10 feet away from the home, I'm not even sure if the blood would work. Maybe you have to consider a dissectum, something smaller, something bushier. I'm not comfortable having drawings where the walls aren't shown accurately. I mean, there's one place with your bioretention planter that's below the driveway. It's showing only dry stacked wall, where in other areas it's engineered wall, and I'm not sure how all that works. And the other thing I think I'm a little uncomfortable with is having parking spaces on this property for another property. I mean, this always kind of assumes that everybody's going to get along in perpetuity, and we know that doesn't always happen. So I think these have to be standalone projects. You have to solve whatever parking requirement you need for the second house on the property of the second house. I think I've rambled on long enough.
Can I add one thing, since
Yeah.
we're still at this?
Go for it.
And Kent brought this up, the standalone project. This whole idea of tree mitigation does not work. I guarantee you. To plant 10 trees down on that lower lot and then maintain them, water them, make sure they don't die, it just does not work. I would be against any kind of off-site mitigation for the trees.
A couple of other really quick things. Maybe I didn't ramble on long enough. Toyon's another plant you might consider on that southern edge. That, you know, it's the big, small tree, big shrub kind of thing. And the other thing is, when we consider a project on the other lot anyway, if we want screening on the north side, we'll ask for screening on the north side, whether or not it's part and parcel of this project or not. You'll be planting trees on the north side no matter what. No, I rambled on long enough.
Okay, great. Do you want to go, give your turn?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I would agree that architecture, I think the house is nicely designed. It is large. It's a big house on a big lot, and that has created some problems with the site planning, but I personally would like to see more replacement trees somewhere. I think that I agree that the 3-to-1 replacement ratio is probably not going to work on this site, but maybe 2-to-1 would work. I think you've created some of the problems because you had some space on the north side of the lot that you've given away now to the other lot because of this property line realignment. I could see that there could be some more oak trees planted on the eastern and southern parts of the property. I can understand you probably want to preserve some of your views, but you're getting a 4,500 square foot house, and that's going to be a very expensive house, and so I think I would like to see some more planting done somewhere. So I think that's up to you to figure out where it is. If you need to put it on the other lot, since you own it, you can maintain it. I would even suggest that the city come up with some kind of an arrangement if it really becomes an issue that you cannot do it on your lot for whatever reason, that we just don't give up that requirement, but we say, well, you have to mitigate it by some other arrangement off-site, like we do with wetlands. You know, and maybe it's a matter of contributing a certain amount of money to put a replacement tree somewhere else where the city would like it, or something. But I mean, the whole idea of we have all these oak woodlands and that we're losing them partly to disease, but partly to development, and I know the public would like to see more oak trees and oak woodlands, so there may be a way of achieving both in a satisfactory way. It's not like this is an affordable house. This is, you know, this is a very expensive project, and so I think that that's something that I would not like to give up on lightly. I think the other thing was brought up, if we can save a couple of oak trees by losing those two parking spaces, those two extra parking spaces to the west, I think that's a good trade-off because like it was brought up, once those parking spaces go in, if they are dedicated, I mean, how would they be dedicated to the adjacent lot? And it might be cumbersome or unworkable to do it that way, so it would be more preferable if the adjacent lot either made their own extra 2 parking spaces on that site, or we at that time come and decide that, well, we don't require it because it's a smaller house or something. And I also agree that because of all these inconsistencies in the drawings and the fact that there looks like there's going to be some rather extensive retaining walls, even if they're not that high, there's still going to be a lot of them, that we should have a more accurate portrayal of that in these consistent drawings, and then some elevations that actually show, because that's probably what the public are going to see mostly from the street, is these retaining walls going up the driveways. And I think that's kind of critical as far as the aesthetics go. So I would encourage I would like to see this project come back with the more consistent set of drawings, a little more information. I'd like to see a good faith attempt to reduce whatever retaining walls there are and portray whatever walls there are, portray them accurately, and then a good faith attempt to find more places to replace, say, a 2-to-1 ratio of the trees that are lost. And I think that it was also brought out, it'd be helpful to know exactly where the trees are that we are losing, so that we can determine that a little better. Those are my comments.
Great.
The existing tree plan, yeah.
There's an existing tree plan, but we can't really tell which ones are being removed and which ones are staying. Xed out. That's fine. Do you want to add anything on the record? Okay. Not open it back up. A lot of my comments are going to echo what my fellow board members have already explained. I think the 3-to-1 ratio is excessive. I think that we could probably get a 1-to-1 ratio, so I'd be happy with that. I know Larry's talking about maybe a 2-to-1 ratio, but I don't see why we can't have 2 additional trees added to the site. The driveway and how it's represented is obviously a big concern, so I think we just need to see more accurate drawings that are coordinated with civil. We need to understand the drainage and just make sure that we have, I see that you already have 3D imagery of the project, so it'd be good to get that coordinated with the civil drawings, get views from the road, be able to really see the elevations of the wall so we can look at it and actually evaluate it for what the main public concerns are here, aside from the trees. I also think making a greater effort to get larger trees that are being replaced would be helpful in offsetting the impact of the ratio that we're not seeing, especially for the investment that this house is taking on. I think getting larger trees planted shouldn't be a big issue. In terms of the Gutierrez's comments, like, you know, I know you guys are asking for additional screening. We have, this photo of your wall. If you have big concerns about it, I don't see why you guys can't go ahead and just plant along your wall. It doesn't look like these plantings are really mature. So I don't really have any, I don't really see the issue there, especially with the amount of windows that are really non-existent here. This one door can be easily mitigated. I also don't think it's the owner's responsibility to screen this property. I appreciate that the neighbors have enjoyed an undeveloped property for a long time. And anybody's going to have a hard time seeing a house or any development being built. But, you know, it's inevitable that it's going to happen. And we want to make sure it's done right. So the board's going to take efforts to make sure it's evaluated and it's done well, but within reason. So I also understand that, you know, the house is rather large. I don't have a problem with the size. I think it's in proportion to the site. So I think in terms of the architecture, I think the east elevation could, the cantilevers and some of the big deep balconies on the east side, the proportions seem a little off. So I think looking at that might be helpful. You really don't have any large windows on the east and west side. And I think, you know, obviously the views are being looked at from the north and south side. And that's where you have the biggest areas of fenestration. It seems a little off balance. But I understand you're trying to mitigate views for the neighbors and have that privacy. So I get that. And in terms of staff's issue with the San Pedro boundary, you know, maybe there's those additional trees that could potentially be added can be along that side. And I'm not sure if, I think the arborist needs to look more closely at this property, and maybe we need to have the landscape architect work with them to figure out where those additional trees can go. But I think it needs to come back. Steve, do you want to try to
Yeah,
give a
believe it or not,
consensus on all of our comments?
No, quite frankly, I can find the commonality in all of this. So essentially, it seemed like the board was thought that the size of the proposed size of the residence was in line with the neighborhood. However, they had some issue, particularly with how the drawings are being presented. There's inconsistencies, and you've asked the applicant to revisit the drawing sets to make sure there is accuracy among the architectural and civil drawings, particularly when it comes to sections and retaining wall heights. And lastly, there was a comment regarding the landscape plan in particular. There was talk about that it needed to be reevaluated, not just on some of the species, but also some of the number of plants and some of the sizing of the plantings. There was suggestions that the planting sizes need to be upsized to counterbalance the lack of replacement that meets the current day standards. But essentially, those are the things that I found common among all your comments. You each had your own comments, but that was the commonality I heard. Is there something I might have missed?
I just want to make sure we have elevations of those driveway walls. It probably is in the general gist of your first comment,
Okay.
but it'd be good to see that.
Okay.
Okay.
Anything else that I might have
Yeah,
missed?
any questions? No comments?
Okay.
Anyone care to make a motion?
I move we recommend we continue this project to allow the applicant a chance to respond to the board's concerns, the consensus items.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those, I guess it's all ayes, so we're good. Motion carries. Meeting adjourned?
Perfect. Thank you.